Okay, guys, we are going to talk about BTC's biggest flaw and their belief system that I see. All right, because we had the BTC versus BSV debate, right? And Gavin Mail put kind of a little thing for that together, and there was a bunch of BSV guys there, basically talking about what was on their mind in response to someone who was talking about interesting, who knows what stuff going on in deep state, things that were planned for years ahead of time or whatnot. I don't know. But one of the things that he said was BTC's got all this hash power, right? So, right, hash power plus plus. Like, it's got all the hash power. You don't want a weak, vessel. You want the big guns, and you want to be able to fight. And I noticed there was BSV Bitcoin. That's the name of his channel. He was participating in this debate as well, and he was mentioning that hash power is not, everything. And that made me realize there's kind of something that I got to talk about, which are the misconceptions about what this hash power really is, right? Because you got a lot of Bitcoin maxis, but they're not really computer scientists per se. Like Michael Saylor, for example. I don't know what his IQ is, but I know that he's not necessarily specifically a computer scientist, all right? He makes physics analogies. He tries to say Bitcoin's like energy. And, I'm not saying that by default that's wrong, but I'm saying that when you study the computer science and you see how the system works, you see specifically why certain variables were put into place. For example, 10 minutes for a block is important because 10 minutes is about the amount of time it takes to propagate information around the world. And it's a balance between like two extremes. Like when you start taking into account things like the speed of light and things like that, that's like a decision like that. But when it comes to block size, there was no decision based on some reasonable, like this is the optimal block size, right? That was definitely the indicators are that there was no set basically optimal block size. Essentially, it was expected that the block size was going to basically grow. I want to say exponentially, but it's not. People use that term a lot, but it might be more of a polynomial growth. But there is since it doubles every once in a while, it is sort of an exponential curve, an expectation. So anyway, let's think about these kind of like three things that nodes would have to do, right? I want to quiz you guys, and I asked this as a poll, not as a quiz on Twitter, because I know on YouTube you can ask either polls or quizzes, I think, but then on Twitter I wasn't sure if I could do a quiz. But what is hash power? What is the hash power nodes going to be good for? Is it going to be number one, breaking ECDSA, SIGs, right? Is it going to... So that's when you sign, I want to send coins from this wallet to that wallet, right? You're going to have a signature. So you're going to have to basically fake a private key sending that coin. Basically, you're going to have to fake that whether you obtain the private key or whether you somehow are able to make a false signature that looks like you're the one who signed, you're the same one who owns the coin who signed it. So that's number one. Number two, you have the Merkle root hash. So when you have all the transactions coming together and you get all their hashes together, right? You're gonna have like a hash at the top, right? And it's gonna be like the Merkle root, right? So I'm gonna say SHA-256, right? because that's the hash function. All right, and I'll just do this to show you that it's a function. Or actually, I'll just say SHA-256 of Merkle root. Right, because that's basically what you're doing. You're creating a tree, and then since you're able to falsify that, that means you're probably able to falsify, certain parts of this tree to make it look like coins were moved somewhere. And since the hashes match, you're able to rewrite a block and try to just make it look as though the block is valid because you matched another valid block, but then what you did was you took the hash so that it matches, and then you try to propagate that block information out, I guess, would be how you'd have to do that. Because if we're assuming number 2, that means we're kind of not assuming number 1, right? So we're kind of saying, like, you can't actually fake the digital signatures, but maybe you can put like a fake block that matches maybe a block that everyone already kind of validated, but then you also try to deceive them. I'm not sure how you'd actually do that, to be honest. So it might not actually, to be fair, that one might, that just take that as a hint, I guess. And number 3 would be the SHA-256 of the nonce plus 2. We'll say 2, right? Because we're talking about this. And that's sort of not going to be necessarily exactly how it is in the code. Maybe they include, some other things in the header. That's not the point. The point is, this is the actual checking where you get the hash that starts with a bunch of zeros for the difficulty, and then you get like, some numbers at the end or whatever, but you're proving that you did the difficulty. So hash power, which one does it help with? Does it help with number 1, number 2, or number 3, right? Well, number 2, I know for a fact that cannot possibly be it, because that means your difficulty is all the way 256 zeros, and that would basically be impossible. Like, if that was considered possible, Bitcoin probably would have already switched to using some other hash function as its way of verifying information. So that's like equivalent to as much difficulty as you could get, when you're doing the nonce checking. The nonce checking, you're only looking for a certain number of zeros, but everything else can be anything. So think about that for a second. ECDSA signatures. I'm not an expert on them, but I haven't heard about them actually being broken, or basically, I've never heard about somebody using like a lot of ASIC machines or hash power or something to basically try to falsify a signature. And they're designed to be, right, a secure signature. So they're designed not to be broken. Obviously, if you require a difficulty of your hash ending or starting with just 1 0, and that's it, well, you got a 50%. I mean, if in just the 256 bits, there's a 50% chance that that first bit's going to be 0. So, I mean, all it takes is on average, like 2 tries or something, and you got your correct, nonce checked. You got your block that you checked. You increase the difficulty, you double that a few times, and that's what the hash power is for. It's overcoming this difficulty. So don't think that, hash power is going to like overcome this, right? It's not going to overcome number 1. It's not going to overcome number 2. All right? It's really for number 3. All right? That's what hash power is basically for. So you got the Byzantine generals problem. You got this problem where you got a bunch of nodes. And the nodes, and by the way, in graph theory, we don't want distributed because we're doing a double spend checking. So I'm sorry to repeat from other videos, but you want your nodes to kind of be like this, where there's a lot of connections so that if some of these go down, I drew a couple extra nodes there, but you can have multiple edges between the same nodes, I guess, because, it's representing like a path through the internet or something. But, if these go down, if this goes down, it still works, right? It still functions. But when you have something that's kind of spread out, all you need to do is cut it one place, and then really the difference between this and this down here is this just has less edges. So the BTC gang, the BTC group, whatever you want to call them, they will say that top one is, more decentralized because they kept the block size small, so therefore there's like more nodes. But the nodes are not necessarily going to be able to connect, and they need to, because you're not just spreading information through a mesh where you're just copying the same information. If we were all just, the purpose of Bitcoin was just like a network that just copies the same file everywhere, like we're just making copies of the Bible or something. Nothing's changing. We don't need it to connect to a specific part of the network. Fine, that would work. If it's reputation, everything's local. But when you're talking about money, you have to have the double spend check, because I'm going to buy something from someone right here in front of me, and then at the same time, I'm going to have my wallet, buy something from someone in China, and they're going to see it. And unless they can instantly check everywhere else, including that little place in China, they don't know that I just try to deceive them for their products. And I can keep doing that, and maybe it would get reported, because of the tracing. And by the way, that helps a lot, but with like with all these types of attacks and things, you got a traced. BSV is very anti-money laundering, so I just made a short about Warren Buffett and his friend there, and they were talking about it being useless and for money laundering, but BSV is actually more efficient than existing systems. You can use it to send, you can use it to purchase internet packets and videos and things like that, and you can also use it, it can be investigated. So when they introduced SegWit, they were really destroying Bitcoin, restricting the block size, keeping the opcodes disabled. BTC destroys the utility of it. So if they're talking about BTC, they'd be correct, but they say Bitcoin. And BSV is really, if you follow the language there, it's more the valid Bitcoin, and they should actually legally, like, they should name BTC SegWit coin. And really, they shouldn't have taken the ticker symbol to begin with. But that's another story. So what happens when you have like a network like that, right? You got like, say, the BTC network around here, and it's got like 1,000 times the hash power. And then you got like the BSV network, and so I want to use different colors here to kind of indicate the differences, but let's do purple, right? So, BTC's hash power is going to be strong enough to try to fake out these blocks, fake out these nodes with some like, who knows, empty blocks or something. And first of all, they're going to verify them, so they have to be something like empty blocks. They can't be, they don't know how to break the signatures, so, and they can't actually get a double spend to persist. So when they do a double spend, they're not actually getting a double spend to stay on the network, because in order to do that, they would have to either fake a signature or fake one of the Merkle root hashes. But in this case, they're just showing that they solved for a block, and that causes the rest of the network to pay attention and say, oh, he solved for a block, we got to take a look at it, and then they'll build on it. So if that's an empty block, fine. They'll just build on top of that then. So if you think about it, like, a double spend attack would be limited to basically some attacker tricking someone. Eventually, only one of the coins exists, right? One of the payments is considered valid in the end, but he gets away with some product, right? So that's not really going to shut down the entire network. That's like, so when someone like Bitcoin University, he says that, BTC is like this big safe, right? Huge lockbox safe, you're safe because it's got the most hash power behind it, right? It's got like the strongest electricity. And yet, regardless of whether it has 1,000 times the hash power as BSV, there's still no double spends on the network. The nodes can go and they can verify all the signatures. There might be some empty blocks here or there, but the network still functions. There's no issues with it getting clogged. And so you don't really need... Remember, the original Bitcoin design is actually wallet to wallet. So if, let's say, purple's wallets, I'll try to use two different colors here, right? So I'm going to pay this guy here, right? I don't need to connect to the internet or anything. I just sign over my coins that I already had. Like maybe I connect to the internet beforehand to kind of make sure that the coins can, like, in order to sign them, I have to have, it helps in the proof to convince them without them needing to like maybe connect to the internet instantly to be able to show like a Merkle hash tree. So it's like a SPV. You can show that the difficulty was there. But even if you don't, like, it's still, you can show like a line of digital signatures and they can still verify that. So they can still, I'm pretty sure somebody could have paid me and I could still pay someone else without even me connecting to the internet, because I would just build on that. I would just sign over the coins that were signed over to me. But I'm not a like expert. That's a little more technical. But here, right, I'm just explaining this at the level, at the level of understanding that we need to understand kind of the differences between just the general, like kind of the structures of the network, I guess. So your nodes here, they're going to be a clique. He can connect to any one of these. If one of them goes down, the rest of the network is pretty strong still. And that's it. So to interfere with this process, even with a lot of hash power, is going to be difficult because there's not really much you can do except spamming, right? You can't falsify the signature because hash power isn't enough. It's not strong enough for that. If it was, then they would end up having to use a whole different signature process. They'd end up using 2,000, however many bits. They're not going to be able to falsify, a Merkle root hash. And so every time a block gets mined, even if it's an empty block, all the other nodes are only going to accept it if it's valid. All the legit nodes. You can try to make more false nodes than legit nodes, but the legit nodes are still not going to accept it because they don't care about majority. That has nothing to do with the calculation. The only thing they care about are the chain of signatures correct or not. So it doesn't matter if you only have one BSV node that's valid, it might get really, you could say it gets spammed, but now that it doesn't need to worry about communicating with any other nodes, it can literally just mine and process transactions by itself as a server. And you can't even do anything about it. You can't even spam it because it doesn't care. It doesn't have to care. It's supposed to add to the longest chain, but if it thinks that it has the longest chain, it can just add to that. So that was just some of the misconceptions. They had this debate, they talked about it, but I'm not sure if it was clear that those are like the three kind of cryptographic things that Bitcoin has, and that hash power only affects sort of that nonce checking aspect. So when you hear someone like Michael Saylor saying, like BTC has more hash power, right? Then the Navy, right? For like energy or whatever, however you draw lightning. Like, that's not actually a good thing. Ultimately, because what it's saying is that the way he sees it is that it's like nobody can penetrate it because you have to have more hash power to penetrate it. It's all about that, the 51% rule is the only thing that matters. But it's really not that way. It's actually going to have to be an economically sustained system. So it might persist for a while because you have more value being pumped into it because it costs so much energy. If you ever look at the real like utility, just go and assume that any crypto like BTC, BSV, whatever, is something that you're going to use as an internal product at a company. It's not something you use to trade to others, right? So you're thinking in terms of like nationwide, global, whatever. But think of it as though you own that company, you own that, that world or something. But you're thinking of the utility, like how does this help us? Like how does this help us to grow, right? And you think about like, okay, well, different employees or whatever, they're trading using this stuff. Do you want to use the one that's just like consuming tons of energy, but not really assisting a lot in trades? Like maybe it seems like it's assisting in making sure the trades are more fair, but it's just like consuming tons of energy and it's very restricted. I don't know, maybe you could argue that it helps. There is like statistical distributions, like you got ZIFs, you got like normal distribution. Maybe it's saying like, oh, the transactions that are like whatever on the top most important ones that have to do with like, altering power. That's kind of a fair argument because I want to welcome fair arguments. Like my analogy that you have a ship, but you're only sending one envelope in it. Well, it's fair to say, well, what's in the envelope? Maybe what's in the envelope is important, right? So maybe that's sort of what's happening with BTC some. And that's more of a good thing than a bad thing because for them, for their argument, because you want it to matter more if it's going to cost more rather than, matter less. So if it's going to be limited to doing a certain number of transactions per second, to doing a certain amount of data, you want that data to be the most valuable, the most valuable data, I guess. And that's sort of how they see it, right? The BTC crowd, people who believe in BSV, don't necessarily see it exactly that way because they know that the actual network itself doesn't work that way. It's not just a hash power war. It's not just, well, your network is just going to go unstable and it's going to falter just because it has less hash power. There's more variables to that. That's sort of my point. So if you're processing more transactions, if you're capable of processing more and more transactions, that's like running a factory. If you run a factory that makes chairs, you're going to make more money selling these chairs from the factory than you are going to make by hand carving the chairs. Even though a hand carved chair is going to be more expensive than a factory produced chair. But that's just because you have, basically no limit. You can be making 1 million chairs every day, instead of 1 chair a day. And yeah, you're going to need more workers, but hey, hash power is not processing more transactions, right? It's using ASIC machines to check more nonces for the competition aspect. So it's not increasing the utility of the network. It's just increasing the sort of the way that it spreads itself out. Okay, but BSV it utilizes that to basically solve the Byzantine generals problem at like a high level, but sort of underneath, because they need to get paid, they're going to want more transactions. And if they can process more, they'll do it. And then they'll get more money to then want to mine more. And the incentive will be to process more transactions because that's where you're going to get paid more, especially as the reward goes down, and the fees are what end up paying for everything. So if the network can't self-sustain, you got to ask yourself, is BTC only growing because it's still spreading around the world? What happens when it finishes? That's why they're talking about it being a Ponzi and a pyramid scheme, because it's still spreading, but it's not really showing the return on investment for its actual total utility. It's showing return on investment for individual buyers, definitely, but what is the overall utility of that? Did they basically, was it just an exchange of value where somebody else had to buy in for them to get the value, right? And maybe it was 10-1, right? So for me to get value 10x, 10 other people had to buy the same coin, but if it's not more efficient, then it's the same thing as me starting a company and saying, well, we're just the boring, the empty company. We are the lazy company. We don't do anything, but if you get people to buy the stock price will go up. So it's, unless you have a real utility, and they'll argue that the utility is the hash power, right? But really, do we really have that much conflict when it comes to buying stocks? When you buy a stock, you use things like digital signatures. You use evidence to show that you bought the stock, you did this or that, and it's not easily it's not easy for anyone kind of privately to make the decision to overrule that. Usually that would have to be something according to law anyway, because it's also basically going to be on some public ledgers anyway. So those are my thoughts after hearing that debate. Thought it was very interesting. Some of the other things that guy said, I liked that he was, just pointing out some things. Maybe they're false. Maybe I don't know. It was very interesting how they were talking about he was talking about things that were planned out, and I don't know. It made me kind of suspect that they're like, for a minute, that they were like, they know how this works, but they're using BTC as a way to grab more value to then invest back into the, the system or something like that. But then he said, hey guys, you want the one with the bigger guns. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, okay, maybe I was just, that was my imagination. So, let me know what you guys think. I think BSV definitely needs to, since it wants to be the real thing, it doesn't need to depend on its creator's reputation. It doesn't need to depend on its ticker symbol reputation. It doesn't need to depend on its name. It doesn't need to depend on all these things. It should depend on actually functioning. And if the nodes are not getting enough fees, eventually the networks couldn't really sustain themselves anyway. They're not going to be able to really increase in value or provide much of a service. So as long as they keep scaling it properly, then yeah, it'll be chosen as a medium of exchange, as a medium of cementing data on the chain, storing code. You could easily, with the size of the chain now, you could just basically do git commits directly on chain, and then as you update your code, you got immutable data, and then you got all your git commits with their hashes on chain. There's no reason why we can't just do that, right? There's no reason why we can't start storing at least images. Maybe videos are a little big still, but I don't know, maybe we can start storing images and stuff. And remember, Craig Wright, he figured out how to, the reason why Satoshi put in double hashes, Craig explained that, and it makes sense. It has to do with being able to, if you have illegal data that the nodes don't have to show you that, they can just show you the hash, or they can sell the mining job out while they can process the transactions. So very interesting. And that was on his website before it was taken down, which I think was done by the High Court in UK. So Pay attention, guys. Pay attention.